Hey, everybody, I got Ryan with Culture Link with me. We're going to talk about short-term teams. I'm telling you, this is going to be a very in-depth subject. I know there's a lot of people out there that are taking trips, international trips, or people are wanting to take international trips. I'm telling you, this is the video for you. We're going to walk you through the process of their material. I hold their book up many times in the video itself, but I'm telling you, they've got two great manuals. We're going to be going over these manuals. I'm telling you, you definitely want to watch this video. It's going to be a massive blessing to you and help you just supercharge your short-term teams. Stay tuned. Are you a ministry or individual exploring global missions? It's burning your heart. You want to get there, but you just don't know how? I would love to walk you through that process. My email address is in the description of this video. Email me anytime. Are you wanting to connect with a community of mission-minded ministers? Check out our Facebook group. We would love to have you join us. The link is in the description as well. Finally, make sure you subscribe to our channel and share our videos with other mission-minded people. Thank you for watching. Hey, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on the Zoom call. Today, we're going to be talking about short-term teams. But before I get into it, I want to introduce you to those that's watching. Ryan Hurlbert, you're with Culture Link, and you guys are short-term team specialists. And, before anybody says, we do short-term teams, we're pros at it, I don't need to listen to this video. Yes, you do, because I'm telling you, I ordered these books from Culture Link. I've read this one right here, and this one I have yet to read. I'm telling you, you could kill an elephant with these books. They're so thick and big. And our ministry, we've developed kind of like a short-term team packet. We've included various things in that packet. Someone contacted me the other day about the short-term team packet. I said, look, I didn't say it specifically like this, but it's like, throw that thing in the trash. You need to contact Culture Link, because that's how much I believe in Culture Link. And then I'm going to tell on myself, Ryan, because you know what I'm going to say here. We did a video already, but that was before I read this right here. I thought, we can just wing this thing. It's going to be easy. But you know what? After reading this book right here, I contacted Ryan back and said, man, we've got to redo this video. I did you guys a disservice. You guys deserve a lot better video than I did before. So anyway, we're back at it now. And I think this is going to be a lot more informative and bring greater awareness to you, the importance of developing a true discipleship-driven short-term team. So anyway, I said a lot there, Ryan, but welcome. Thank you for joining us again.
I appreciate it, Sean. No, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed getting to know you. And hey, another Zoom call is just another opportunity to talk about the kingdom and the work that God has given us and that we're privileged to serve in together.
Amen. And, I believe you guys have just a huge, massive heart for the kingdom of God. I mean, it's all laced within that material. And, we talked about it last time about discipleship, but really the key importance is truly discipleship and guiding and leading that person through a lifetime of missions. It's, short term is really not a good term in the sense of short-term teams, because it may give you a thought that, hey, after this 1 week, I'm done. I took my trip. But see, with your guys' mindset and your guys' heart, it's like you need to mold and shape people into a lifetime of service into missions. And, it's not necessarily trying to send everybody to the mission field in long term, but it's about developing awareness in people's minds. And, one thing that I pointed out in the notes that we're going to cover today is that basically, some people will trumpet these statistics and they say, short-term teams, they don't develop future missionaries. There's just no statistic behind it. They don't develop people that have giving hearts. There's just no statistics behind it. And then also they say that, they really don't develop an awareness of global missions. But see, again, I truly believe in my heart that if they follow your system, what you guys have put in place, I truly believe that you will create disciples and create future missionaries. You will create givers into missions, and you will create people that have awareness of global missions. So again, I just want to make sure that people understand this material isn't, hey, make sure you pack this and make sure you pack that. And, oh, don't forget your Bible and, make sure you put mosquito spray in the bag. It's not that. It's so much more than that. So anyway,
No, I
Um,
appreciate that. And I appreciate that you see that too, because that's our goal. And we believe that if people follow that process, they'll see that fruit as well. So the fact that you're saying it is affirming to us.
yeah. Well, to me, it's in the notes, and I guess we'll just skip right over to it. Let's just start here. Where did all this develop? How did this develop? Because I'll tell you this. I've read a lot of books, and I was blown away by the content that was put in this book, and I mean the dedication to create this material. So, how in the world did this even get started?
Yeah, I think I have to go all the way back to really kind of the mission that drives everything that Cultural Link does, whether we're training up short-term team leaders or we're doing worker and missionary care, pastoral care internationally, or for consulting with churches, and even in my own life, is that our mission at Cultural Link is to make disciples of those who make disciples of all nations.
Mm-hmm.
The church across the globe and throughout history has been given this mandate that I'm sure everybody watching this video knows very well. It's Matthew 28, 19, and 20, which starts out, as you go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. And then we get a couple of specific marching orders. That's it. The mandate there is to go and make disciples. God has not called us to go and build buildings or to dig wells or to do vacation Bible schools, to stop sex trafficking, whatever the cause du jour is. Now, I think all of those things are really good expressions and can be good expressions of this mission, but ultimately what God has called us to is discipleship. Mm-hmm. And even that word that we see in our English translations of go, make disciples, the word go is actually really passive. It means literally as you go, or as you go about your going. The verb there is make. So what does it really mean to make disciples of all nations? So Culture Link was birthed out of this philosophy of making disciples of all nations. If I can kind of back up and give a little bit of the history on,
sure, please.
We know what short-term missions is in our context, and anybody that's watching this video probably has this instant picture in their mind of what a short-term mission team does or looks like. But it's actually a very modern thing. It wasn't all that long ago that this category we have didn't even exist. Maybe 150 years ago, we can read these great missionary biographies, Hudson Taylor's and Adoniram Judson's, those types of people coming from the West and going around the globe. And as technology and communication developed and speed increased, then there started to be this shift of, maybe we can send people instead of for these career, they're never going to come home. Maybe we'll bring them back every 4 or 5 years. And then maybe we can shorten that a little bit further to every maybe couple of years. One agency started a program called the Journeyman Program, where they would send people for 2 years after graduating college. And maybe that would be a span towards long-term service. But it really wasn't until the 1950s, 60s, but especially into the 70s, when our modern concept of short-term missions was really just thrust into the scene of the global church and what this even looked like. And it started really with 3 organizations that pioneered this movement using college-age students. And the idea was really kind of put out there and proliferated by Ralph Winter, who founded the U.S. Center for World Missions. And the idea of sending these, whether they be summer teams or semester abroad, and then eventually now we've got 2 weeks to a week, maybe even a holiday weekend. The idea is this concept of short-term missions could be a catalyst for the 3 things that you said before. First is that we're going to see an increase in the number of long-term workers that are committing their lives to serve around the globe. The second thing is that you're going to have more generosity coming out of the local church through these people that have served around the globe, because 1, they've seen the needs around the globe, and hopefully that the Lord would break their hearts for these the needs, not just amongst the globe in general, but specifically the church. And they would also see the opportunities to help fund what the church is already doing around the globe. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing was that, maybe as these people go and serve elsewhere, they'll catch this vision for Matthew 28, 19, and 20 to make disciples as they come back home. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, though, those things did not happen. to the extent that in one of the last interviews that Ralph Winter gave before he passed away, he said if he could go back, he would actually resist pushing this idea of short-term missions to the extent that he did because of the damage that he saw short-term missions causing around the globe. And those threefold goals were not being realized. And there's plenty of research out there showing so. Be happy to link people to those things. So where did CultureLink come from?
Okay.
In 1995, the U.S. Center for World Mission, which was founded by Ralph Winter, basically identified, okay, there's a breakdown here. Short-term missions and their teams, it's not really realizing this threefold goal that we thought. What's missing is discipleship, real intentional spiritual formation of those going, so that if they are trained better before they go, they will serve in a more healthy manner and they'll come back and the impact will last even longer, both there with the partners that they're working with on field sites and back home in the agencies and the churches that we're mobilizing. So the U.S. Center for World Mission approached our director, Larry Reagan, to begin developing a discipleship model for short-term teams.
Okay.
And it started really from there and then carried on in its infancy stages for the first, 5 years or so as that curriculum was being developed. Our director then served as a missions and teaching pastor here in the States, and the curriculum and that training model began to mature a little bit as it was used to mobilize his own short-term teams. And then in 2010, CultureLink was founded as a nonprofit, completely separate entity. The curriculum was completely revamped and really put in a more systematic and linear way so that we can address the entire process of discipleship through short-term teams. And that's what we're working with going now. And that's this huge books that you said could take out an elephant. That's what that's the product of that you have there in your hands.
Okay. So, one thing that I've noticed within the book, it's not, and I talked about before, it's not necessarily dealing with the logistics. Again, I think it's a small layer or it's covered in a small fashion within the book about logistics, but it's more about building team camaraderie, so to speak, through devotions, through exercises, and so forth and so forth. So I guess to me, I think I want you to kind of stress the importance of doing this because, obviously within the book, it's covered on some various things that happen in the field. And, unfortunately, some team members are not well prepared to go to the field. While they're in the field, sometimes the ugly side rises up. Conflict in teams rise up. Not dealing with the culture properly, being offensive within the culture as far as the communities that they're going to go serve. Some of the individuals are just outright offensive, and so I think what you guys do real well in this book is you teach people through these exercises, through these training exercises. These are all pre-trip, the importance of developing a team understanding, developing an importance of understanding who is who, how they think, what they do, and so forth. So if you don't mind, share and talk to us about what this book does as far as in developing a stronger core as far as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right there. We do touch on the logistics, the administrative portion of leading a short-term team, because that is a very significant piece of leading these teams, whether that be overseas or just cross-culturally, even within your own city or state. So the problem is that I've never met a short-term team on the field, whether it's somebody that's working with one of our ministry partners internationally, or just you see these groups in the airports all wearing their matching t-shirts. I've never met a group that hasn't gotten their passports, that didn't have their suitcases packed, didn't have the necessary paperwork to get in country. So the administrative stuff is important, but I have often met teams that get to a field site and they're not prepared to serve, at least to serve in a healthy way and in a humble way. I've met plenty of teams that were not prepared for the cultural challenges. So what our curriculum is really based off of is, yes, do the administration and do it well, do it with excellence. But let's also make sure that we're spending as much or more time preparing the hearts of those that God has entrusted to us as leaders as we mobilize them into these cross-cultural environments, wherever they may be. And there are certain elements that I think are universal across the spectrum. And it's really helping teams to identify that when you go on the field, you're embracing three distinct roles. The first one is every team member goes and team leader goes, and you're taking on the role of a student, as a guest, is the first one. That you are being welcomed into an environment. And what does it mean to be a guest? What does it mean to receive the hospitality of your field site partners and just the community in general that you're serving amongst? The second one is a student. And this is this posture of constantly learning. We use the phrase culture link and in our own lives that a leader is a learner. And you always have to be in this posture of, I have something more to learn. And if your teams go into this mindset of, okay, wherever I'm going, it doesn't matter if it's in Mombasa, Kenya, or San Jose, Costa Rica, or in Mumbai, India, or just downtown Atlanta, working with one of our nonprofit partners here, there's something that you can learn. And taking on that role and that posture of a student from the outset prepares their minds to learn from their host, from their team leaders, from each other in their team, and ultimately, and most importantly, from the Lord himself. And then that third role, though, is a servant. And this idea of this posture of servanthood that we talk about Philippians chapter 2, that we should have the same attitude as that of Christ Jesus, who did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but instead emptied himself of his God rights and took on the nature of a servant. So what does it mean for me as a team leader or just as a team member to take on the nature of a servant as I serve cross-culturally? So we come out of the gate, though, teaching, okay, yeah, we're going to instill these three roles in you, these three postures. But this isn't just for going and doing this for a week in Honduras.
Exactly.
What this is really about is this is a reorientation around a discipleship philosophy for the rest of your life, that as we seek to grow our teams, as we disciple them and make them more mature followers of Christ, this is not a buffet approach to Christianity where, okay, let's get a scoop of small groups at our church and we'll get a scoop of this special conference. And then this is the greatest bestseller right now on, the Christian list. So let's get a scoop of that. Oh, you know what? We probably need to go on a mission trip. We'll get a scoop of that. And we get one scoop of everything on our plate. And we think that makes us mature Christians. And that's not the right approach at all. So instead, what we're trying to help them see from the very first training session is, no, this is a lifestyle shift. This is a worldview shift in the way that you conduct yourselves and how you can carry out this great commission that God has given us in Matthew 28.
Yeah.
We come out of the gate just talking about what does that look like in general, and then how do we begin to express that through the idea of short-term teams.
And I think the thing that anybody can make a mistake on is just assuming, wait a minute, these people are servants. These people love God. These people, they're humble. These people are going to work together great in the culture. And I just think that is really not the right attitude to have, because I think the book does really well. And like I said, your activities, so to speak, in the devotions are so well written and so well timely placed within that process of preparing them for the actual trip itself, that you are literally walking people through a process of awareness of, like you said, discipleship. And it talks about unity so much so in the book, and I want you to actually cover that as far as the importance of unity for the team. But I think that just it's a stepping stone into the future. And I think that's why what people need to understand, that you should be utilizing these short-term trips for the future of that individual. It's not just that 1 week event. It's just not that 2 week, 1 month event of their life. It's like a stepping stone into their future. And you're utilizing the short-term team to do so. But just talk about the importance of unity and the importance of dealing with that. And don't make the assumption that you're going to be unified as a team without, going through this process of development pre-trip.
Yeah, no, I think you've probably experienced plenty of teams over the years in your leadership. And I know anybody that's watching this that has received teams knows that oftentimes, even those teams that are really well intended, that and some of them may not be, but most of them are, but still cause damage is because they come with their own agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have teams that are coming with their own agenda, what you actually, even if you've got a group that have all agreed to the same tasks together, they've got on the same airplane together, they've traveled to the same place together, what you have really is ultimately a group of individuals that are really seeking, they've just kind of rallied around the same ideas. But it starts from the very beginning and helping them to understand that if we're going to become a team, we have to understand the value of each individual that God has placed on our team. But also, in order to understand the value of what they have, I also have to understand that I don't have it all together. I don't have everything that I need to go and serve. We all need each other. And then as we begin to understand that as a team, then we also are beginning to create that attitude of humility, that we're supposed to model in Christ Jesus, so that when we get to the field site and as we prepare to go to the field site, this isn't just about me and what I have to bring. What do they have that's a value that comes to the table? And then that mentality shifts to the field site as well, because you realize, wait, what they're doing is a value too. So what do they have here that we can fit in? But then also it's this give and take mentality of partnership in Philippians 4, where Paul commends the church of Philippi that you shared with me. And this is the matter of giving and receiving on both sides. So we start out of the gate really with these team building elements. And just on a 30,000 foot level, this experiential element of team training, of getting people to interact with each other and learn by putting their hands on materials and not just downloading information, like watching videos like this, which are great, is you've got to get them interacting for the process of formation to really happen. So your team meetings, these team building is not just one session. Now we have a session in our book that talks about team building, but as you go through each and every single training session should have an element of team building, because unity is really important on a team. Your teams will experience culture shock. There will be challenges, logistical challenges, psychological challenges, certainly spiritual challenges as our teams serve on the field. So helping them understand how a team is actually formed and how they operate and why they need each other before they go will help them be even more effective when they get on the field. They'll be able to overcome challenges a whole lot better. And as they begin to understand their need to rely upon each other and to become interdependent, when they get to the field site, it will help them realize, well, we need to rely on each other just as Christians across cultures, that it's our team and the church that's hosting us, we're one as well. And then when they come back home, and which I know we'll probably get to talking about debriefing later, why it is important to continue that same attitude of team and unity when they come back to their churches, so they can get connected, so they can serve, and they can continue this mission that God has given.
Well, I'm going to take a side note here, a little bunny trail, but I think one thing that pastors they're hungry for something that's going to radically change their church. And to me, the thing that I'm seeing, the more and more I'm working through the mechanics of missions and mission awareness and global awareness and so forth, and the pastors I have talked to over and over that are mission-minded pastors, they have repeatedly over and over said that missions have changed their church. Missions have developed greater servants in the local church. Missions have developed a greater unity within their church. And so again, taking this process of going through this material as far as cultural link, it's like you are truly developing a church for the future of your church in the sense of servants, givers, awareness of the Great Commission, the need to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, and so forth and so forth. So I apologize, a little bunny trail there, but
Can I give a caveat off that?
Oh,
real
sure.
quick?
Absolutely.
And this might be more than real quick, but I agree with the sentiment that I think the embedding this missions culture within our congregations is something that every church needs to do. And I think short-term teams are a way to do that. But I've also received so many letters, emails, or been on the phone with field sites around the globe that they kind of shudder when they hear a pastor has said, I want everybody in our congregation to go on a mission trip next year. And they're like, wait. We don't want everybody in your congregation to come. Please don't send us. In fact, there's a buddy of mine who's been on the mission field for several years. And the organization that he was with was doing their end of the year evaluation. And they were talking about, okay, how many short-term teams and team members, do we want to bring out onto the field next year? And his leadership said, how about we increase it by, and it was about 40%. And he was like, actually, I was thinking, how about we decrease it by about 20%?
Oh, wow. That's
interesting. So I'm all for getting people on the field because I think short-term teams are a valuable tool.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's not just about saying, okay, we've got something in our church that needs to be fixed. And I think let's just throw all of our eggs into one basket and get everybody on a team. I think that actually might help perpetuate some of the problems that we're doing. What really matters is how are you using these tools? And I keep saying tool. Short-term missions is a tool, because if I have a hammer and if we were sitting in the same room and I slammed it into your forehead, to make it a good tool or a bad tool?
Yeah.
The hammer has no moral value. What matters is who's using it and how is it being used. And short-term teams are one tool in the local church's toolbox. So what you've got to figure out is, okay, how can we use this tool in the most effective way for what we want to build? And you know what? Some people may not need to use that tool. Some people may be better to use this one over here. And then start to figure out, okay, why is this tool of short-term missions so unique and so different that makes pastors and makes churches want to use it more? Because I think it can be helpful. I think there's three distinct benefits of the tool in the toolbox of the local church that short-term missions is. First is that I think it is outwardly focused in terms of, the entire team of a short-term trip is gathered together for the primary focus of looking outwards, looking outside of the church, looking outside of themselves. And not that inward focus is bad. We need those things. And when I say inward focus, I mean the small groups, the Bible studies, the care groups, those types of things. Those are great groups, but they're inwardly focused. They're for inward development. Teams for mission are outwardly focused in their design. The second thing is, I think there's this interdependence that happens as teams have to navigate airports and planes and buses and taxis and foreign languages and weird foods, and they all get sick and are using the bathroom at the same time together. Mm-hmm. Topics of conversation come up on teams that you would never hope to talk about on a Sunday morning at your church. And then the third thing, I think short-term teams allow just this unique unleashing of spiritual gifts and abilities that we don't intend to hinder through our normal programs at church, but it's just they're not nurtured in the same way that teams are, where everybody needs to embrace this spiritual gift of service. Everybody needs the gift of exhortation, but then also because you're in a strange environment, outside of your element, and to use a really overly used term, outside of your comfort zone, you now are put into a place where you are forced to learn yourself and to develop new skills or abilities that I don't think most of the other tools in the toolbox of the local church provide as many opportunities for.
Yeah. Okay. So, and, I definitely wasn't suggesting that everybody should go on a short-term team because
your field sites will be very thankful that churches are not advocating for that.
Yeah. No, I think it needs, obviously in the material, there's an application process, there's an interview process. So definitely wasn't suggesting that, but I just think developing a culture and awareness of global missions and the importance of the Great Commission and interweaving that within the fabric of the church I just think that a lot of pastors witness the change, the radical change that they have within their church, because like you said, there's an outward focus instead of like an inward focus that a lot of churches, they're great, like you said, great on the inward focus because there are some needs, but there's definitely that outward focus. And when you're flowing outward, there's a continual refreshing and supply within the body itself. So let's just kind of quickly jump over to culture. You kind of lightly touched on it. There was a thing in the book that shared about the Fiji trip, where they were supposed to be picked up at a certain time. The church started at a certain time. They were picked up an hour later, and they're just frustrated because most gringos, most Americans, we're, hey, 10 o'clock, you should be here by 9:35 because it takes X amount of time to get to church. That's how Americans think. But they were picked up an hour late. They thought they missed the service. They got there and the service hasn't even started, because in that culture, they're not time sensitive. And then in that culture, they didn't start because they won't start church until everybody's there. So they were all upset and worried. And then once they got there, they realized, wait a minute, we haven't even missed service. But it's a good lesson to learn. I get a lot of Americans down here that will come on these teams and they expect, everything to work clockwork. And, we're a well-oiled machine as far as our ministry. We got time stamps. We're very well versed in time management, but we have to work with the culture as well. So, we witness that. We see that sometimes because of those that we're working with, they're not as timely as us. And we just have to tell our teams, look, there's nothing to be upset about. It's going to be okay. The service is going to be wonderful. Or this event's going to be wonderful, even though it got started 30 minutes late. So just, share with us a little bit more about the culture and how you guys prepare them to become more aware of the culture.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And I'm smiling as you're talking about this. Like, I just got back from Latin America as well with a team. And we joke that I think one of my favorite words that a buddy of mine who served in Latin America for quite a while, that I've started to adopt and just use here in the United States, is the word ish.
Okay.
And every team needs to understand the word ish, because any group, any American that has been outside of the US, maybe with the exception of places like Japan or Western Europe, the concepts of time are so different. So when it comes to understanding plans or schedules or agendas, everything needs to have an ish added onto it. Lunch is going to be served at 12-ish. We're going to leave in an hour-ish. Ish becomes your operative word. But yeah, no, in terms of culture, so after we dig in and start creating this long-term vision for discipleship, then you have to begin to understand, okay, but what does that look like in the unique context of the place that I'm going to go serve with this team? And understanding culture is more than just going through and reading off the dates chronologically of the important things in their history, or, this is what they wear, so this is what I know to pack, or this is the types of food they eat. When we're talking about how to understand culture and maneuver these cross-cultural environments, what we're really addressing ultimately is worldview. So in training session 2, we do talk about understanding the culture you're going to go to and the kind of these surface level things that we can observe. But in training session 3, how do you become cross-cultural? Where we always look at the what's that people do. We look at what time something starts, and maybe we look at what time something starts in light of when they said it was going to start, like a church service in Fiji or a church service in Kenya, or when we're going to go get on the bus to travel across the city. So we look at what somebody does. We look at what food they're eating. We look at what clothes they're wearing. We're looking at what celebrations. We're looking at what the programs are for the ministry that we're working with. And we're teaching these teams to, okay, you've asked the question, what? You've made the observations, but if we stop at the what's, then something's going to happen. We're only going to start judging and evaluating, is this good or is this bad? Is this right or is it wrong? And we leave it at that.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy for teams. It's not healthy in my own life if all I do is I look at what somebody does and I never move past that. You have to begin teaching your teams to start asking the question, why? Because when you observe somebody's outward behavior, the outward appearance, the surface stuff, you're asking what. But when you begin to ask the questions, why, you begin to uncover the values that drive these behaviors, that drive these outward expressions. So like one of the examples in the book that you read is this team that was frustrated because church was supposed to start at this time. And then it didn't. They didn't get picked up on time. So they were frustrated and they began to judge the culture that they were in. But once they began to understand why did we not get picked up? Why is church not starting on time? It's because they actually value making sure that everybody that wanted to participate and be involved in church could participate, which involved going and picking up people that had no other means of transportation, coming from long ways off, so that they got them here, then they actually could start sooner. So just helping teams navigate and identifying the what's of the differences, but then asking why.
Yeah. If you don't, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interject here, but one thing that I think that those that are watching need to understand, because you're like, oh, time, okay, I understand the difference in culture. But what Ryan's saying and what the book is saying is so much more important to understand, is just like with the gypsy example, it's not dealing with time but it's what it's done is this, and I'll explain, is that they were going to build something, but they had to tear something down. The Americans is like, let's just get chainsaws and sledgehammers and just throw it all in the back of a truck and just haul it off to the dump. But what they were getting, the Americans were getting upset about is I believe it was in Romania. The gypsies were slowly just taking every piece off and not damaging it. And the Americans were getting frustrated because, they're project driven. We've got to get this thing built before we leave. And the gypsies were more like, no, we're going to protect what we're taking down. Why? Because they can reutilize it within other areas of their life. Either they're going to go build something or repair something at their home. They're going to use this or that or this or that. And they didn't want it just all torn down and thrown into the dump. So the Americans got upset and got an attitude about it. In all actuality, we need to understand something, that even though we've got this mindset, we've got to get this building built by the end of this week. Well, what's more important? Christ is more important. So if you're going to go into the culture and offend them and tear this building down and throw it in the trash, you've just severed a relationship that you're trying to build by just going and building something. But in all actuality, just taking the respect and saying, okay, we're gonna honor your wishes, we're gonna help you, but the only thing is, we may not be able to get this project done before we leave. Is that okay with you? Yes, it's totally okay with us. Well, guess what? It's not about the project. It's about Jesus. And like you said, open it up with the manual. We all have these preconceived ideas, like you said, clothing drive, going and building something, go and do this, go and do that. But if it supersedes, or if it goes beyond Christ, well, then guess what? You're really not taking a short-term trip for the right reasons. So I think honoring culture, and again, as long as it don't violate biblical standards, then you should be honoring their culture. You should be doing missions with their culture mindset, to where you're not going to create a divide and an offense in their hearts, that now you can't even minister Christ to them. So hopefully I didn't step on your toes, but
no, that's great. I love it.
I just, that gypsy story is a perfect example.
Yeah. And I've been there. Like I've worked with, gypsy people in Romania. And like we were saying before, I mean, unless you're going into maybe certain pockets, of other places in North America or Western Europe where there's a lot of cultural similarities, it's very easy to see some of these things on the surface. So what we're actually doing is part of our training curriculum is there is a cross-cultural personality assessment that we use that identifies some of these primary cultural tensions. And what's interesting is that it starts to pull out some of the individual unique stresses that we all feel even here in the US, because we're making some broad generalizations about, the culture that we're going to go serve in East Africa or Southeast Asia or in Latin America, but there's also differences within that. And these assessments start to bring a lot of these things into focus. So we can now identify, okay, these are the challenges and these are where challenges might arise. So now we can begin to address and alleviate some of that attention. We may not solve all of it and probably will not, but we're at least going to address some of these tensions beforehand. So the assessment deals with aspects like the time versus event orientation, like we just talked about, task versus people orientation, dichotomistic versus holistic thinking, crisis and non-crisis orientation, status and achievement orientation, and then your willingness to expose vulnerability versus your concealment of vulnerability. And the book breaks down what all these means and why they're important. But the assessment does more than just say, well, this is us and this is them, and here's the differences. Yes, we want teams to understand this is how you individually are different from the culture that you're going into. But it's also going to help identify, okay, as a team, we're all bent towards this angle. This is how our group is different. Because we're talking about this team building thing, but we need to understand how the group is different from the place we're going to. But it also helps to identify even potential conflict within team members.
Yeah.
Because you can have two people from the same background or the same demographic that are in the same church and the same values, but their personalities are very different. I remember the very first time I took the assessment that's in our Culturing book was at a training seminar that I attended, not on staff. This is before I joined the staff of CultureLink. And I went through this with my wife. And we did this cross-cultural personality assessment and we scored it. And we looked up at each other and we're like, wow, this explains a lot about the tensions even within our own marriage. I mean, these are people that my wife and I love each other. We're committed. We both love the Lord and we really had a great, strong relationship. But even this assessment helped to identify some of those cultural differences because my wife and I had slightly different worldviews because we came from slightly different families. And just the way that those things even drive a married couple. So then you carry that out over 6 or 8 or 20 team members. And now they're not just going, to another neighborhood in their own town, but they're going around the world. So it begins to address some of those tensions so that now we can begin to alleviate some of those things and bring some understanding and help the teams identify, hey, those 3 roles, guest, student, and servant, these are the challenges that you're going to have as you adopt those 3 roles. So how, in the differences of time, how can we be a guest? How can we be a student in terms of their dichotomistic versus holistic processing? And then how can we be a servant when it comes to status versus achievement? Those types of things. So yeah, a culture is huge, but it's so much more than just, hey, let's look at all the differences, the distinctions. No, we've got to begin to address how do we become cross-cultural and do it with the attitude of Christ Jesus, like Philippians 2 says.
Amen. Now, we're kind of walking through the material, so to speak. I don't mean to skip over this part, but, for time purposes, I want to definitely cover debriefing and then home and looking forward. But I can promise those who are watching that they definitely cover while you're at, while you're on the mission trip, they definitely cover through devotions and talking about the importance of devotions, talking about definitely in the importance of interacting, working and discussing things that was positive, what was negative, working through those issues while they're in the mission field. They definitely talk about that. So, I want to talk about debriefing because, normally I like to say something funny. So, to me, I'm just thinking debriefing, just psychobabble, come on, man, we're going to go back home. Everything's being okay. I'm going to go get my McDonald's Big Mac or whatever. I don't need debrief. Well, again, Sean, thinks he knows what he's talking about. I read through the debriefing process and now I'm aware of the importance of debriefing and why you should debrief. I want to take an excerpt out of the book because I think it's important. And again, one thing I want to say, I don't think debriefing psychobabble. So I'm just, I just think that sometimes, guys are just like, I'm not that touchy-feely type person. So, but the quote is this: I honestly believe that if you're not going to properly debrief, you are not going to properly prepare for reentry. And if you are not going to provide time for God to redirect people's lives, don't take the trip. don't go. Not doing these things is dangerous. And I think what I take out of that is this. And again, going back to what we have been saying, this short-term trip is not just the 2 weeks of this person's life. This is a lifetime shaping, molding process that you're taking these people through to bring them to a greater awareness of how missions and global missions can play into their lives. So this debriefing process further helps do that. So anyway, go ahead and just share with us about what you feel and what you see about debriefing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we are huge proponents of debriefing of any kind after a short-term trip. Training and the types of training that we've talked about I think is lacking, and we probably could do a better job as a church in America on training our teams properly before they go. But even those groups that do train their teams, I would say the most neglected element of any short-term team and the training and preparation process is debriefing. Mm-hmm. And why does it matter? Well, there's research that was done quite a few years ago, and we actually addressed this in our curriculum. We've found that there are 3 ways that people respond when they come back after a short-term trip. And a couple of them are really unhealthy. And research was done a while ago that of all of these groups that are going out on faith-based trips, whether they be service projects or evangelistic trips or whatever it may be, these cross-cultural experiences that we call short-term missions, when they came home, 1 out of every 10 participants would leave the church within a year.
Wow.
Let me say that again. 1 out of every 10 participants they identified in their research would leave the church, not leave their local congregation, but actually walk away from the church itself within a year after returning home. And a big part of that is because they did not know quite how to process the experience of what they dealt with, what God showed them. And that doesn't mean that they had a terrible experience on the field. It may actually be they had a very impactful and monumental experience, but when they came home, there was no understanding on how to process that and implement the things that they learned. It could build resentment or bitterness because they saw, wait, this church over here had nothing, but they still seemed to worship and to serve each other and to serve their community and live in community in a way that we've got all these resources here, but we don't do anything with it in a way that looks like that. That seems more true, but this doesn't. So there's a huge disconnect, and there still is with a lot of teams. There's even a gap year program that I work with that started to notice there was a lot of just heartache and headache and frustration when their gap students would go home just for Christmas break, and they'd only been overseas for about 3 months. And they would get home and they would get frustrated. They would become bitter or resentful at their families, their friends, their home churches. Or some of them would get home and they'd be like, I don't think I want to go back to the gap program after this Christmas holiday. And the reason I think debriefing is important is you've got to help people begin to unpack and process all that they've experienced, all that they've learned, and all that God might be teaching them in this ongoing capacity. And the reality is, when you're on the field and you're actually serving and day in and day out, and you're wearing yourself out, for the kingdom, doing really good stuff, you have no real time to process your experience. And then as soon as your plane hits the ground back home and you jump back into everyday life, whether that be work, school, family, whatever it may be, our lives are too busy here. We don't really have time to process well either. So we advocate for actually coming alongside of your teams and working with them and creating this space to debrief in a way that takes that long-term orientation that we talk about from training session number 1 and says, okay, here's where we're going now.
Yeah.
And giving them that space to unpack, okay, what are the new things that God has taught me? What were the hard things that I experienced, and what do I need to reconcile? And then the redirection of, okay, what do I do with this information? What do I do with these tensions? And begin to help shape their worldview again. There comes that word, reshape their worldview for that discipleship philosophy as they go about their going for the rest of their lives.
Amen.
And just to give you a brief, just kind of story that we've heard from people that are connected with our organization, we're teaching team leaders on the importance of a debriefing process. And one of the ladies in the room just starts tearing up, and just tears are rolling down her cheeks. And we stopped and we asked, hey, what's going on here? Like, this seems to be hitting home. And she said, I wish I had this training or this understanding 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. My daughter went on a trip when she was in high school. And by all accounts, from everybody that was on that trip with her, and even like the little bit of communication we got while she was there, it was an amazing experience. But after she came home, within a couple of weeks, she became very isolated, very removed, very cold, and basically started to completely flip around and really rebelled against the church and the faith. And just, there was this bitterness and resentment. And she struggled in her spiritual walk and her journey with Jesus for the next 20 years.
Wow.
Because she never really could quite process and deal with the difficulties and the beauty of what she saw God doing in the place that she was serving. Now, praise God, she did come back and has a robust faith, and she's faithfully following the Lord. But there was a very hard period for the family after this girl came home from a trip, because it was not debriefed well.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to do that, but if you expect for short-term teams to be used as an effective tool, you've got to show them how it can be an effective tool for the long term.
Amen.
And not just hope that it's going to happen.
Yeah. You kind of help them unpack their experience, and then how does that experience apply to their future, and how can they positively take that experience forward. And that kind of goes into our closing about, home and looking forward. And I think we've already, we've hit it over and over, the importance of how you could take this tool, this short-term team tool, so to speak, and use it for their future. And one thing I'm going to read one more quote out of the book. It says, their mission isn't over. Rather, it's really just a beginning anew. Their lives and priorities should be different as they move forward. So, different in their personal lives, different in their lives as far as how they interact with God, different in how they interact in church. Just seeing, it's just like even in my own self, I've been in the mission field 8.5 years, just my whole mentality has been transformed and changed from the person I was in 2007, the person I was in 2005, and so forth. I mean, I'm totally a different human being today than I was then. So I think what it's saying, in my life started changing on my short-term trips. I mean, that's where everything of who Sean Paul was changed that moment in my life, because I started taking short-term trips.
Right.
And God answered my prayer, my cry from my heart, in these short-term trips.
Right. And that process, that debriefing, leads to the reentry and leads to home and what now. And as team leaders or people that are mobilizing these teams, you want to help your team members unpack these big ideas that they have of, hey, I went on this trip and, I want to go serve on the mission field and give my life to this. I feel like there's a calling here. Or, I want to go and sell all of my belongings and just give it all to the poor. Or I want to come back home and I want to build this incredible ministry. So, hey, those are those threefold goals we talked about, right? That was the purpose of short-term missions being put out there in the first place, of more long-term goers, more generosity, and more implementation back home. But in order to actually see that happen, you also have to walk them through what are the reasonable next steps.
Yeah.
Great. You feel like you're supposed to quit your job as the vice president of IT at this multinational corporation and serve on the mission. Well, maybe you should. But what can you do tomorrow?
Yeah.
Besides just quitting your job, you got a family, you've got kids and all that. What can you do to start moving towards those things? What are the reasonable next steps? And I think even the people watching this video are going to have to ask this question. Okay, I love this philosophy of discipleship and short-term teams, and I want to get more people engaged and doing this in a healthy way. So the question for people watching is, what's your reasonable next step?
Yeah.
Start there and then work towards those big ideas, those big goals with a reasonable next step, one at a time.
Yeah. And, I'm not going to give them a plug, but it's, the Service Reef you and I talked about. It's the software that you and I were talking about prior to the video here. And I love what they do in that. And it's kind of correlating with what you guys do is it manages that short-term team process, so to speak. It doesn't replace anything that you guys have, but I'm just saying it manages that short-term team process. But like what he stressed was the importance of managing that individual into a lifetime of service into global missions, wherever that may be. And like you said, creating realistic expectations and realistic next steps that can take place in that individual's life. Because again, once you get done with that short-term trip, what are you going to do? What processes are you going to walk through to begin this new life, so to speak? And like I said, I just like that software because, again, it's not like you're going to try to control that individual as a minister of the gospel, but you're going to help them, kind of coach them through that process of individually showing them what maybe possibly their next steps could be in their service unto God, into, being more aware of missions and so forth. So
I'm all for tools that help you work smarter and not harder. And especially if you can automate some processes and just create that systematic approach where, that this is the baseline for everybody that experiences this. And I mean, that's really the hope of our curriculum as well, is we think that our books, yes, they're huge. They're not formulas. They're toolboxes.
Yeah.
So this becomes the baseline, the foundation for, okay, now we have a linear and a systematic process to disciple our teams. And then you can figure out what that looks like and create it and cultivate your own meeting, content, those types of things as well. But start with something. Get a foundation that you have ready to start mobilizing teams well. And if you're mobilizing multiple teams, then it's the same systematic approach for all of your teams. And it begins to raise that bar of expectations for your leaders, for your teams, and for the church that's supporting them and behind them as they go.
Yeah. And, for anybody that's saying, hey, I want to get that material, definitely going to put your information in the description where you can find their website and then order that material. Obviously, Ryan, I'm sure you'll make yourself available if they need you. And I highly recommend, one thing I'm learning in this whole entire process is learning collaboration, networking. Find out what tools have already been created. Why make your work a lot harder? There's a lot of great partners out there. And I believe that Culture Link would be just an incredible partnership for you in developing short-term teams for your ministry. Well, Ryan, I greatly appreciate your time. This has been an awesome conversation. I love the fact that you and I redid this video because, again, I just think it does a lot better service for you guys and really make people aware of truly what this product is about and your guys' heart for missions and global missions around the world. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Sean. I enjoyed it too.